Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas, joined today by the Paul. We're going to be talking about we're going to briefly talk about the 48-hour saga a couple of weeks ago now, but myself and Paul haven't discussed it yet. We're going to be talking about what's next in terms of the investment into the club from MSP. And we'll get on to what everyone really wants to talk about is the potential transfers this summer or lack thereof. But first of all, Paul, thank you very much for coming back on. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I think by the time we get to transfers, we probably won't have a huge amount to say. But we'll get to that when we get there. But no, all good. Enjoying the summer, Tour de France, a bit of cricket. Yeah, all good.
Yeah, fantastic. Then we may as well start off a couple of weeks
And
ago.
no Everton as well.
Oh yeah, of course. It feels weird. I mean, everyone's now back in for pre-season on the day we're recording this, so I'm not sure the break felt long enough. I mean, when I saw the Fantasy Premier League prices coming out, I definitely thought the break hadn't been long enough. But a couple of months away, about a month away from Premier League football yet. So we will start off a couple of weeks ago, as I said, with the board basically entirely being replaced. Apart from one man in particular, but Bill Kenwright did stay on after the initial statement sacking the board said that an announcement would be made about the chairman's future within 48 hours. It was then over a week later when they announced that he was continuing amongst other changes to the board, including Farhad Moshiri appointing himself to the board. So, Paul, just if you could take us back a couple of weeks now, what was your reaction to that? Kind of Kenwright staying on and Moshiri now appointing himself. Is this very much a temporary board to kind of carry us over?
Well, it is a temporary board, but again, it's just a reflection of the sort of general levels of chaos that exist at Everton Football Club, and predominantly driven by the actions of Farhad Moshiri, who doesn't seem to be able to make a decision and keep to it. So, it was interesting when I think it was June the 12th, wasn't it, when the three directors resigned, and yet the club, or in the club's announcement, they thanked them for the hard working planning, the process, the transition process from the old board to a new board. It looks anything but planned. Sort of 3 weeks on. Initially it's believed that Bill Kenwright wanted to step down, but he had certain conditions in terms of stepping down, what he might be offered in replacement of being chairman, so a life presidency, for example. There's also some discussion about what happened with his shares, but there's no obvious buyer of those shares. Moshiri doesn't need to buy any more shares, possibly doesn't have the resources to do so anyway, and certainly wouldn't want to buy them at the price that Bill Kenwright was looking for. And then we sort of get into the second week, having said that it would all be sort of sorted out within 48 hours. Clearly, that didn't happen, and it didn't happen because they couldn't reach an agreement. And then Moshiri changes his mind and persuades Bill to stay on for, another period. Now that period won't be very long. It will be. He'll step down as soon as the MSP investment comes in. So in one sense, that's a relief that will be a relief to most Evertonians. But the whole thing is just indicative of, as I say, the chaos that surrounds Farhad Moshiri. I think the MSP deal has been pretty much on the table since January, and yet at the time when the board changes and an interim board comes in, which people are told it's another 4 or 5 weeks away from being completed, which doesn't suit anybody. Certainly doesn't suit any Evertonians, does it?
No, I think, as you said, it absolutely just sums up the chaos of the board. They're not acting in the club's best interest. All of this will inevitably affect the transfer window, but that is something we're going to get onto. I'm not saying that the magical MSP investment is going to solve all our profitability and sustainability problems, but with all this kind of stagnation at the club and interim board, Moshiri appointing himself, because obviously he's decided he's a fantastic decision maker. Kenwright staying on, it just kind of sums up the chaos that we've known for years at the club, and puts us in the predicament that we're in today. And you touched on there that now rumours that MSP was still waiting for 4 or 5 weeks. What is kind of, to your understanding, the latest on that? Why is that
Okay.
been kind of delayed since January?
Just before I get onto MSP, I mean, one of the reasons why Farhad Moshiri, and probably the sole reason for Farhad Moshiri putting himself on the board, is that he wants to protect his own interests. So when the MSP deal does complete, they will be bringing people in. They'll be bringing people in like Andy Bell and George Downing, two local businessmen from Liverpool, both lifelong Evertonians. They will be coming in on the board, but not necessarily as MSP representatives. MSP themselves will probably take 2 seats. So Farhad Moshiri needs to. I think he's thinking that he needs to sit on the board himself to know fully what the board is happening. In a sense, his eyes and ears, which has been Bill Kenwright for the last 7 years, with him departing from the board, which is what is going to happen. Moshiri feels as if he himself has to sit on it. Now what's happening with the MSP deal? We identified a couple of weeks ago that MSP had lodged papers with the SEC in America, which is a sort of a legal requirement for them to do so, because they'd raised $165 million from 13 investors. And the intention is to use that money to invest in Everton Football Club. But how that money is invested, how the money is going to be used, nobody is really that clear about. And also, what does the deal look like? You know, people have said, well, it will allow MSP to buy 25% of the club. I don't think that's correct. This is a debt deal that will allow MSP to convert the debt into shares at some point in the future, but the stake is going to be much bigger than 25%. And I think with subsequent lots of money that are going to come in, because $165 million doesn't solve our problems. £135 million, £130 million, sorry, doesn't solve our financial problems, doesn't pay for all of the stadium, doesn't cover the external debts that we've got, doesn't provide any money, I think, for the transfer window. So it's clear that more money is going to have to come in, and I suspect that it's MSP that's going to have to put that money in sort of over the next, well, certainly within the next 12 months, possibly even within the next 6 months. And as a result of that, eventually they will end up having control of Everton Football Club. Farhad Moshiri will effectively lose control because he'll be diluted out. Now, what does that mean? Well, when MSP put the money in, first of all, as I say, it goes in as a loan, but then it will be converted to new shares at a later date in exactly the same way that Farhad Moshiri converted some of his loans into new shares. Something very similar will happen with MSP, but the number of shares that they get, because the value of the business is much less now than it was when Moshiri converted his shares, means that I think within 12 months they will have control of the club, so they will own more shares than Farhad Moshiri does. This is not a question of, they're not buying shares off Farhad Moshiri. The club will issue new shares just in the same way as it issued new shares to Farhad Moshiri, 2 or 3 years ago. So I think this is a very significant period of time for the club. It's not going to solve our problems overnight, but I think in 12 months' time we're going to look very different from how we look now.
Well, hopefully for the best. Saying that, because we all know that the Moshiri era has been chaos, and as you touched on just before about how the offer has been on the table since January. People will ask why it has taken so long. Is that more just because of Moshiri's deal making, or what is the potential issue there?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that he's been looking around for alternative investors, not just MSP. So, we know that he had discussions with 777, and I think there's probably at least one other group that he's had discussions with. So he's in a position whereby, he clearly recognises that he himself can't put any more money into the club. So he's in a position where he's trying to get the best possible deal for himself. Having put £750 million into something, he's not going to give it away for nothing. The problem he's got is that it's not worth very much, even with a half-built stadium. It's not worth a huge amount at all. So any new investor coming in is going to take a much bigger slice of the business than he probably ever thought was likely to happen. So it's clear to me, at least, that Moshiri has been, shopping the club around. He's been trying to find a better deal for himself, as against not necessarily a better deal for Everton. He's been looking for the least expensive option for him to get money into the club and for him to retain as much of the of his shareholding as he possibly can. I think that's where we've been for the last 6 months, and it's where we are now. I think we're obviously quite close now to the MSP deal completing, but that's what this has all been about. Farhad Moshiri trying to figure out how he could create the best possible deal for himself.
And how much of that delay kind of causes stagnation at the club? Because we've discussed how there is a temporary board, and if there's a temporary board, you're never going to see many major decisions being made. But across the club, in terms of more towards the playing side, how much stagnation to this kind of uncertain period? I could say it's an uncertain period. We're pretty certain that the investment is going. It's just a matter of time. But what impact does this have on the rest of the club at a time where we've just come off the back of two relegation battles? The playing squad is arguably worse than it was at the end of last season. I know Yerry Mina leaving did have quality, despite the fact he played about 10 games all last season. But what is the knock-on effect for this on the rest of the club?
I think it's potentially a very damaging effect. You hear whispers that a lot of people within the club wanted change after the Bournemouth game. They wanted to know exactly who the investors were going to be, what the investment amount was, what they were going to do with that money, and who was going to do it. It's who were going to be the board members, who were going to be the new chief executive, who's going to be the new CFO, and obviously that's for the staff and for the people within the club. And then on the footballing side, both Sean Dyche and Kevin Thelwell must have left after the Bournemouth game, one would think at least, with an idea of what their budgets were going to be for the summer. But if that investment hasn't happened and won't happen till the end of July, then is it the case that they do know what we can spend, and therefore who our targets are? There's a lot of stuff in the media about paying 40 million euros for this player, etc., etc., etc. I think they're all totally pie in the sky. It's not going to happen. We will have even with the MSP money coming in, most of which will go to the stadium and to paying down some of the debt, including Andy Bell's debt. Very little of it's going to go to on the playing side. So you're absolutely right. We're in a weaker position now than we were after the Bournemouth game. And it's not very obvious how we get into a stronger position. And I'm sure that's not a message that any Evertonian wants to hear. It's certainly not a message that I want to hear. But I think that's the stark reality of it. I think we face, for the third successive season, a battle to stay in the Premier League, because our squad is going to be so weak, not necessarily because of the manager, not even necessarily because of the director of football. It is just going to be a question of resources.
And at the end of the day, that kind of impact on the playing side, on the transfer budget, does lead us to have to raise funds from somewhere. If Sean Dyche does want to spend any money that is caused at the top of the club, will impact the transfer window going forwards. If we look at the players that we're linked with, you mentioned there El Toure linked with the 40 million release clause. There was a bit of a fairly cryptic message from the Almeria owner. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, saying that there was interest from Everton in it. But it is hard to see how the club could spend that much money when you compare it with like linked with Rodrigo from Leeds for 2 million, and we are now having to look to the academy to raise funds. Obviously, first team players will be for sale as well, and there were early rumours that Damari Gray might be off to Saudi Arabia, but there is clearly interest in him, and we knew for a long time that if we were going to buy this summer, we would have to sell. But it doesn't look like there are too many rumours about many major outgoings from the first team squad. So if we look at the academy, there was some disgruntlement on Twitter last night selling a young player for 4 million. He's off to Chelsea, Lewis Warrington, and the rest. So what's your take on the club now, kind of almost being forced into selling the academy players to raise funds?
I think that's what a modern football club does, and I think we need to just understand that. I mean, why? It's a business at the end of the day, and the academy is a bit like a sort of research and development department within a business. You put some money into developing young players, and you hope that some of them are going to be good enough and will want to play for the first team if they are good enough, i.e., stay at the club. And obviously, from time to time, we unearth players that do that, but predominantly, the academy is about producing players that can play professional football at different levels of the game, and getting a fee for those players as they move out of the academy and they start their professional career. It can't be possible that we keep every single academy player. From a financial point of view, that makes no sense at all. An academy probably costs at least £10 million a year to run. So we have to get a return on that. Otherwise, there's no point in having it, frankly. So yeah, that's just the nature. I think that's just the nature of the business. And obviously with Everton and Everton's finances being in the condition that they're in, it's doubly important.
Yeah, what do you make of the other rumours about, because we're obviously not signing anyone for 40 million up for what? Because rumours that the deals would be structured in a different way, but even that seems, as you said, quite wide of the mark.
Yeah, I mean, and it's it's possible to sort of get payment terms that stretch out the payments over say 4 years, but a 40 million euro deal over 4 years is still 10 million euros a year, and we just don't have that sort of money spare. And if we did have it, that would probably account for most of our budget. So, given that the squad, needs a number of players, not just one or two, we are going to be looking at loans. We are going to be looking at free transfers. We are going to be looking at players that don't command a large transfer fee, and that's just the way it is because of the way the club's being run. And until we eventually get through, and this is probably the last year that financial fair play is, or profitability and sustainability, to use the correct term, impacts the club. Until we get through this, and until we get on a more stable financial footing, possibly even until such a time as the stadium is open, we're going to continue to have these problems. Unless we sell our best players, but we don't have many of our best players left to sell. So we're in, I've talked about it for a long time. We've painted ourselves into a corner that's really quite difficult to get out of, and it is going to be another season of where the objective is to stay in the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got no issue with the club selling academy players. I mean, countless times over the last 5, 6, 7 years where there's been bright academy prospects that have ended up kind of just dwelling at the club. They've had poor loans out. They've then ended up staying at the club till they're 22, 23, and we've left on a free. We've never got a transfer fee for them. So I think it's hard to criticize the club for letting these talents go, especially with they're going into the final year of their contract. At the end of the day, with the state the club's in, if they don't see a pathway to the first team, they'll just run it down and go for nothing. So I've got absolutely no issue with the club trying to raise funds from the academy. I mean, hopefully there might be a couple of sales at first team level, but we haven't exactly afforded ourselves the luxury of making the squad any thinner. And something I did also want to touch on was the rumor that came out this week that the Cody transfer clause wasn't released more based on a financial perspective more than a Sean Dyche not liking him perspective, and that was of course before the end of the financial year. So how relevant now is the end of the financial year? I think I read an article on The Athletic, I think it was in the last week, talking about how it's almost like a transfer window within a window now, that clubs are, because it is about balancing the accounts, that although it was a $4.5 million clause that potentially the club could have afforded, even at a stretch, that because it was before the end of that financial year, that the club didn't make it.
Well, I suspect, and I don't know for certain, but I suspect this not being able to buy Cody before the end of the financial year relates to probably whatever it is that we've agreed with the Premier League sometime last year. If you recall, for all of 22-23, effectively we were under the control of the Premier League in terms of who we could buy and when we could buy them. And so quite possibly we weren't able to buy anybody before the end of the financial year for that reason. In terms of the accounts, it really wouldn't have made much difference if we bought somebody in June as against buying somebody in July. It just wouldn't have made a difference. So certainly that's not the reason. So it's not for accounting purposes. I think it's more to do with whatever agreements that we may have had with the Premier League.
Yeah, and it does leave us in this position that kind of approaching, well, as I mentioned, pre-season starts today. I mean, I doubt the car park's particularly busy. There doesn't seem to be that many players left at the club. The likes of Dele Alli will be coming back, Obama, Gomez, all still somehow at the club. It doesn't even feel like they're still here, but because of these ridiculous contracts that we hand out to these players and the ridiculous wages, we can't shift them.
Yeah, if you look at the current first team squad is 24 players. And that includes a 39-year-old reserve goalkeeper. It includes, as you say, Dele Alli, Gababin, Gomez, and Neil Maupay. So you strip out those five, you're down to 19, and that 19 includes, some youngsters who are not yet proven.
Yeah, so I don't envy the job that Dyche has to do.
Yeah, we are in a difficult position. We're probably down to a core of 17, 18 players.
No, it feels like, when Hull got promoted, that feels like quite a few years ago now. And that team photo when there was about 9 pros left at the club. I feel like we're almost in that position. And
it is a ridiculous position, isn't it, given the amount of money that's washed through the club in the last 6-7 years.
Yeah, and I mean, even the likes of Tom Davies not renewing his contract now harms the club, not a player that was anywhere near the first team, but because we've now got to replace a replacement almost, we've got to find that backup player, and that will come at a fee. I mean, I'm sure the club will be looking at the free transfers, but it doesn't seem like there's too many rumours on that perspective anyway. So I do not envy the position that Dyche is going into, while there's still not the clarity about the investment into the club. While the transfer budget, as we've talked about, is unlikely to change anyway. So that's not going to get much better before the start of the season, and we have an incredibly thin squad. So not too many positives today, Paul. But have you got any final thoughts?
Well, I think it's not a question of either being positive or being negative. I just think it's being wholly realistic, and I think the incoming investors, MSP, and the incoming board members have to recognise that there has to be a huge amount of change at Everton, and that we can't continue to operate in the way that we've operated previously. We can't allow the people who have made the bad decisions that have got us into the position that we're in to continue to have control of the business. So regardless of what shareholding Farhad Moshiri ends up with when all of this sort of unwinds, he's got to be effectively taken certainly away from the footballing side of the business. Bill Kenwright no longer being chairman means that he won't ever be involved again on the footballing, or shouldn't be involved again on the footballing side of the business. And from my understanding of the new investors and everything, they clearly don't want him to be part of the new Everton going forwards. But it also means that we've got to bring in new people. We've got to bring in a proper CEO that's got experience of businesses that are in difficult circumstances like we are now, but also somebody that knows how to grow a business and knows how to develop a business and develop revenues. Because at the end of the day, there's two aspects to our financial position. One is the amount of money that we've wasted and spent. But the other side of the equation is we've not generated enough money. And whoever comes in now, the new investors, the new board, etc., the new executives, revenue generation has to be a key part of the plan going forwards in order to get us out of the situation that we're in, where we're scrambling around for, in the middle aisle of Lidl.
Yeah, but just on that note, that will bring us to the end of the video, or the podcast. But thank you all very much for listening, Paul. Thank you very much, as always.
Pleasure, mate.
Thank you all very much for listening. As I said, be sure to give us your thoughts down below on the position we find ourselves in now. Hopefully, investment is just around the corner. Hopefully, we can get, well, as we've discussed there, we almost need 4 or 5 players through the door before the start of the season. So let's hope that develops well in the next month or so. And myself and Paul will get together for another chat, I'm sure, after we've actually done something this summer. But thank you all very much for listening, as I mentioned, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues. Goodbye.